The sound of gunshots echoed through the crimson-striped canyon walls as Tessa Armstrong urged her exhausted mare forward, the animal's labored breaths matching her own panicked gasps. 3 days on the run had left both horse and rider at their breaking point, but the thundering hoofbeats behind her meant stopping wasn't an option. "Get the girl," a gruff voice shouted from somewhere too close behind her. "Holloway wants her alive, Arizona Territory, 1883. What had started as a simple journey to visit her uncle's ranch had turned into a nightmare when her stagecoach was ambushed. The driver and guard shot dead, the other passengers robbed and released, all except Tessa. When they'd discovered the letters in her possession, everything changed. "She can't keep running forever," another voice called out, followed by cruel laughter that sent shivers down her spine. Tessa's honey-colored hair had long since escaped its pins, streaming behind her like a flag as she navigated the narrow canyon passages. Her once fine traveling dress was torn and dusty, her hands raw from gripping the reins. The saddlebag containing her most precious possessions, the deed to her uncle's land, and the letters that had marked her for pursuit, bounced against her thigh with each gallop. The canyon narrowed dangerously, forcing her to slow the mare to avoid the jagged rocks. A fatal mistake. A bullet whizzed past her ear, too close, and her horse reared in panic. Tessa struggled to maintain control, her heart hammering against her ribs as she searched desperately for any path of escape. That's when she heard a different set of hoofbeats, coming not from behind but ahead. Through tear-blurred vision, she saw a rider emerging around the bend, silhouetted against the setting sun. Tall in the saddle on a powerful black stallion, he rode directly toward the chaos. Without hesitation, the stranger maneuvered his mount between Tessa and her pursuers, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. His voice, deep and steady, cut through the canyon like a knife. "Enough." Just one word, but delivered with such quiet authority that the outlaws actually pulled their horses to a stop, dust billowing around them. Tessa's exhausted mare pranced nervously as she tried to steady the animal. For the first time, she got a clear look at her unexpected defender. Broad shoulders beneath a dust-covered duster, dark hat pulled low over his eyes, and a determined set to his jaw that suggested this wasn't his first standoff. "This ain't your business, cowboy," the lead outlaw snarled, a man with a vicious scar cutting across his left cheek. "The woman's coming with us. She's under my protection now," the stranger replied, his gun hand steady. "Turn around and ride away." The outlaw's laugh was ugly. "There's 4 of us and 1 of you, bad odds." "I like those odds just fine," the cowboy said, and something in his tone made Tessa believe him. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sounds were the nervous shuffling of horses and the wind whistling through the canyon. Then, with deliberate slowness, the cowboy raised his gun. Last chance. The outlaws exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. Their leader's eyes narrowed as he studied the lone rider. "Wait a minute," he said slowly. "I know you. You're York Thornton." The name was spoken with a mixture of surprise and newfound wariness. The cowboy York didn't respond, but his silence was confirmation enough. "We'll be back, Thornton," the leader finally said, turning his horse. "With more men, the girl's worth good money to us." "Then you'll die for nothing," York replied, not lowering his weapon until all 4 riders had disappeared around the bend. Only when they were gone did he turn to look at Tessa, his expression softening slightly as he took in her exhausted state. "Miss, are you hurt?" His voice was gentler now, concern evident in his deep blue eyes. "No, Tessa's words caught in her throat as the adrenaline drained from her body. Her vision swam, darkness creeping at the edges. "I think I'm going to." She didn't finish her sentence before sliding sideways off her horse. The last thing she remembered was strong arms catching her before she hit the ground and a rough voice saying, "I've got you." When Tessa awoke, it was to the crackling sound of a campfire and the scent of coffee. Night had fallen, with stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Arizona sky. She was lying on a bedroll, covered with a worn but clean blanket. Sitting up abruptly, memories rushing back, she found York Thornton crouched by the fire, watching her with those intense eyes. "Easy now," he said, pouring coffee into a tin cup. "You're safe." Tessa clutched the blanket, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. How long was I unconscious? Couple hours. Exhaustion, I reckon. He approached, offering the cup. Drink this, it'll help. She accepted gratefully, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. Thank you for everything. York nodded once, returning to his place by the fire. Those men, they're Holloway's gang, mean bunch. What you do to get on their bad side? Tessa took a sip of the strong coffee before answering. I didn't do anything, it's what I have. She hesitated, unsure how much to trust this stranger. But he had saved her life. My uncle owned a ranch near Silver Creek. When he died, he left it to me, along with evidence that Burton Holloway had been stealing water rights from ranchers throughout the territory. York's expression darkened. Holloway's been squeezing small ranchers out for years. Nobody's been able to prove anything. My uncle did. Tessa reached for the saddlebag she was relieved to see nearby. I have signed affidavits from other ranchers, forged documents with Holloway's signature, even a confession from one of his former men. That would explain why they want you so badly. York poked at the fire with a stick. Those papers could send Holloway to prison. I need to get to Silver Creek. There's a federal marshal there who my uncle trusted. Tessa met his gaze across the flames. Mr. Thornton, I don't know what your business is in these parts, but I would be forever indebted if you could help me reach Silver Creek safely. York was silent for a long moment, studying her with an unreadable expression. Finally, he said, Silver Creek's a 4-day ride from here, through rough country. Holloway's men will be watching the main trails. Tessa's heart sank. I have money, I could pay you, it's not about money. York cut her off, standing to check on the horses tethered nearby. Holloway and I have history, bad history. Then you understand why stopping him is so important. When York turned back to her, there was something different in his eyes, a decision made. We'll head out at first light. Try to get some rest, Miss Armstrong, Tessa Armstrong, Miss Armstrong, he nodded. I'll keep watch. Tessa settled back onto the bedroll, watching as York resumed his seat by the fire, rifle across his knees, profile sharp against the night sky. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Every sound in the darkness had her tensing, expecting Holloway's men to appear. They won't find us tonight, York said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. This canyon has 100 hidden places, I know them all. How did you find me? Tessa asked. York was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. I was tracking Holloway's men. They've been more active lately, raiding ranches, threatening settlers. Didn't expect to find them chasing a lone woman through Rattlesnake Canyon. Lucky for me you did. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Get some sleep, Miss Armstrong. Tomorrow will be a long day. Morning came with a spectacular sunrise that painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and amber. Tessa woke to find York already saddled up and ready, his efficient movements suggesting years of life on the trail. There's jerky and hardtack, he said, nodding toward a small bundle. Not much of a breakfast, but it'll keep you going. Tessa didn't complain. After 3 days of barely eating, anything was welcome. As she ate, she studied her rescuer in the morning light. York Thornton was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His dark hair curled slightly where it emerged from beneath his hat, and a few days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his features, a quiet strength that matched his actions. We'll stay off the main trails, York explained as they mounted up. Follow the canyon north for a while, then cut west through the foothills. It'll add a day to the journey, but we're less likely to run into trouble. Tessa nodded, adjusting her skirts as best she could for riding astride. Her mare seemed refreshed after a night's rest, prancing eagerly as they set out. For the first few hours, they rode in companionable silence, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. Tessa found herself relaxing slightly, the constant fear of the past few days ebbing in York's reassuring presence. May I ask you something, Mr. Thornton? York glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. York is fine. York, then. Tessa hesitated. Those men recognized your name, are you? Known in these parts, a shadow crossed his face. You could say that. Are you some kind of lawman? His laugh was short and without humor. No, Miss Armstrong, quite the opposite, once upon a time. Before she could press further, York raised his hand for silence, reining his horse to a stop. Tessa followed suit, straining to hear what had alerted him. After a tense moment, he pointed to a ridge above them where dust clouds suggested riders moving parallel to their route. Holloway's men, she whispered. York nodded grimly. They're searching the canyon systematically, smart. What do we do? Change plans. He turned his horse toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall that Tessa hadn't even noticed. This way. The passage was barely wide enough for their horses to navigate single file, forcing them to dismount and lead the animals through the tightest spots. The walls rose so high on either side that only a thin strip of sky was visible above. Where does this lead? Tessa asked, ducking under a low-hanging rock. Old Apache Trail. Comes out near Widow's Creek. From there, we can cut across the Diablo Range toward Silver Creek. You seem to know this territory well. York didn't look back as he answered. I grew up around these parts, left a long time ago, but some things you don't forget. They emerged from the narrow passage into a small hidden valley, lush with unexpected greenery thanks to a spring bubbling from the rocks. York allowed them a brief rest to water the horses and refill their canteens. As Tessa splashed cool water on her face, she caught York watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. He quickly looked away when their eyes met, busying himself with checking his stallion's shoes. Were you coming home? She asked suddenly. When you found me. York straightened, his broad shoulders tense. What makes you ask that? You said you grew up here but left. I wondered if you were returning. He was silent for a long moment, staring out at the horizon. Not exactly. There's nothing left to come home to. Something in his tone discouraged further questions. Tessa sensed a pain there that ran deep, and while curiosity burned within her, she respected his privacy. After all, he was risking his life to help a woman he didn't know. They continued their journey, the terrain growing rougher as they left the hidden valley behind. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a storm. We need to find shelter before that hits, York said, eyeing the sky with concern. Flash floods in these parts can be deadly. An hour later, fat raindrops began to fall as they approached an abandoned line shack nestled against the side of a hill. It was little more than a one-room cabin with a sagging roof, but it offered protection from the elements. It's not much, York said as they hurried the horses into a lean-to beside the cabin, but it'll keep us dry. Inside, the cabin was dusty but intact. A small iron stove stood in one corner, and rough-hewn furniture, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed suggested the place had once been a way station for cowboys working the range. Belongs to the Circle M Ranch, York explained, dropping his saddlebags on the table. Or used to before Holloway forced Old Man Miller to sell out. While York checked the chimney and got a small fire going in the stove, Tessa took stock of their supplies. They had enough jerky and hardtack for another day or two, coffee, and a few cans of beans. Not a feast, but sufficient. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming on the roof and turning the ground to mud. Thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning illuminated the cabin in brief, stark flashes. We'll stay here tonight, York said, removing his hat and duster, hanging them on a peg by the door. Without the long coat, Tessa could see the lean strength of his frame, the way his shoulders tapered to a narrow waist, the gun belt worn with the ease of long habit. I'll see if there's anything useful in the cupboards, Tessa said, suddenly needing something to do besides stare at her rescuer. She found an old coffee pot and some tin plates, dusty but serviceable. At least we can have a hot meal. As they worked side by side in the small space, York tending the fire, Tessa warming beans in a pan, she found herself increasingly aware of him. The way he moved with quiet efficiency, the gentleness in his hands despite their roughness, the occasional glance he cast her way when he thought she wasn't looking. Have you always been on your own, Miss Armstrong? York asked as they sat at the small table with their simple meal. The question surprised her. Tessa, please, and no, not always. My parents died when I was 16. I lived with my aunt in Boston until recently. When word came of my uncle's death, I traveled west to claim my inheritance. Boston's a long way from Arizona territory. Yes. Tessa smiled faintly. My aunt thought I was mad to come out here. She said the West was no place for a respectable young lady. She's not entirely wrong, York said, his expression serious. It's a hard land, especially for someone alone. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Thornton. And I don't intend to be alone forever. My uncle built something worth fighting for, a legacy that matters. Once I've dealt with Holloway, I plan to run the ranch properly. York studied her across the table, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. Most women in your position would sell the land and return east. I'm not most women. Tessa met his gaze steadily. This land was important to my uncle. He loved it enough to fight for it, to die for it. I owe it to him to at least try. A crack of thunder rattled the windows, making Tessa jump. York rose to check that the horses were secure, pausing at the door. Your courage does you credit, he said quietly, before stepping out into the storm. Left alone, Tessa took the opportunity to straighten her appearance as best she could. She removed the pins from her tangled hair, using her fingers to comb through the worst of the knots before rebraiding it. Her traveling dress was beyond salvation, torn in several places and stained with dust and sweat, but she brushed it off as well as possible. York returned, rain dripping from his hat and shoulders. Horses are fine, storm's settling in for the night though. Tessa nodded toward the narrow bed in the corner. You should take the bed, I'll be comfortable enough by the stove. Not a chance, York said firmly. You take the bed. I've slept on worse than a cabin floor. She wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with her again. With a grateful nod, Tessa settled onto the bed, pulling a rough blanket over herself. The rain continued its steady drumming on the roof, strangely soothing after days of fear and flight. From her position, she could see York spreading his bedroll near the stove, his movements deliberate as he removed his boots but kept his gun belt within easy reach. The domestic scene struck her as oddly intimate. This dangerous man, who had faced down 4 outlaws without flinching, now preparing for sleep in the soft glow of the stove fire. York, she said softly, how did you come to be enemies with Holloway? He was silent for so long that she thought he might have fallen asleep or chosen to ignore the question. Finally, his deep voice came from the shadows. My family had a small ranch near Silver Creek. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. When Holloway started buying up water rights, my father refused to sell, said water belonged to everyone, not just those with money. York paused. One night, riders came, set fire to our home while we slept. My mother and sister didn't make it out. Tessa's hand flew to her mouth. I'm so sorry. I was 15. My father and I tried to rebuild, but Holloway made sure nobody would sell to us, work with us. Eventually, my father, his voice hardened. He couldn't live with the grief, put his gun in his mouth one winter morning. And you? I rode with some rough men for a while. Did things I'm not proud of. Thought about coming back and killing Holloway, but that would have made me no better than him. York's silhouette shrugged in the darkness. So I drifted. Worked as a scout for the army ranch hand, whatever came along. Never thought I'd come back here until I heard Holloway was finally facing justice. Is that why you were in the canyon? You came to see him brought down, something like that. York's tone suggested the conversation was over. Get some sleep, Tessa. We've got a long ride ahead tomorrow. Despite her exhaustion, Tessa lay awake long after York's breathing had deepened into sleep. His story had touched something deep within her, a recognition of shared purpose perhaps, or simply human connection in this vast, unforgiving land. Eventually, lulled by the rain and the warmth of the cabin, she drifted off. She dreamed of fire and pursuit, of faceless men on horseback and endless canyons with no escape. In her dream, she was running, lungs burning, legs failing, when strong arms lifted her to safety. I've got you, a familiar voice said. You're safe now. Tessa woke with a start to find early morning light filtering through the cabin's single window. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a washed, clean world and the scent of wet earth. York was already up, tending to the horses outside. His bedroll was neatly packed away, coffee bubbling on the stove. She sat up, pushing hair from her face, oddly disappointed to have missed seeing him in the vulnerable state of sleep. The thought brought heat to her cheeks. What was wrong with her, having such thoughts about a man she barely knew? Yet there was something about York Thornton that pulled at her. Perhaps it was the contrast between his dangerous competence and the gentleness she'd glimpsed. Or maybe it was simply that he was the first person since her uncle's death who seemed to understand what she was fighting for. York returned as she was pouring coffee, nodding approval at her initiative. Storms passed, ground's muddy, but we should make good time today if we stay in the foothills. How far to Silver Creek now? 3 days if we're lucky. He accepted the cup she offered, their fingers brushing briefly. 2 if we push hard and don't run into trouble. Do you think we will? Run into trouble, I mean. York's expression was grave. Holloway won't give up easily. Those papers you're carrying could destroy everything he's built. And he's not a man who loses gracefully. They set out after a quick breakfast, the world around them glistening with raindrops in the morning sun. The storm had left the air crystal clear, revealing vistas of breathtaking beauty-distant mountains, rolling hills covered with sagebrush and cactus, vast open spaces that made Tessa understand why people would fight to claim this land. York led them along game trails and narrow passes, always alert, frequently stopping to listen or study the horizon. By midday, they had covered considerable ground, pausing near a small stream to rest the horses and eat a sparse lunch. "Tell me about your ranch," York said unexpectedly as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "What's it like?" Tessa's face brightened at the question. "It's beautiful. Not as grand as some, but the land is good. There's a creek that runs year-round, even in drought seasons. The house sits on a rise overlooking the valley you can see for miles. My uncle ran mostly cattle, but he was experimenting with horses too. Sounds like a place worth fighting for." "It is," Tessa said softly. "When I first arrived after my uncle's funeral, I stood on the porch and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. I'd never seen anything like it. In that moment, I understood why he never wanted to leave, even when things got dangerous." York nodded, a distant look in his eyes. "The West gets in your blood. Some people never understand that. Is that why you stayed, even after everything that happened to your family?" "I didn't stay," he reminded her. "I ran, for years." York picked up a stone, turning it over in his palm before skipping it across the stream's surface. "Maybe coming back now is a way of finally facing what I should have faced long ago." Tessa wanted to reach out to offer comfort, but something in his posture warned against it. Instead, she said, "It's never too late to make things right." York's eyes met hers, intense and searching. For a breathless moment, Tessa thought he might say more, might open that guarded heart further, but the moment passed as he stood abruptly. "We should keep moving." They rode through the afternoon in companionable silence, making good progress through the rolling foothills. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, York led them to a sheltered hollow where they could make camp for the night. While York tended to the horses, Tessa gathered wood for a small fire. She was arranging stones in a circle when a distant sound made her pause. Hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable. York was beside her in an instant, hand on his gun. "Get behind those rocks," he said urgently, gesturing to a jumble of boulders. "Take your saddlebag and stay hidden." "What about you?" "I'll lead them away if I have to." His expression brooked no argument. "Go, now." Heart pounding, Tessa grabbed her saddlebag and scrambled behind the boulders, pressing herself against the cool stone. From her hiding place, she could see York quickly obliterating signs of their camp, then leading both horses behind a stand of brush before taking up a position where he could observe the approaching riders. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed. Through a gap in the rocks, Tessa saw 3 riders appear at the edge of the hollow, scanning the area with rifles ready. They weren't the same men who had chased her through the canyon, but they had the same hard look about them, Holloway's men, without doubt. "Tracks lead this way," one said, pointing to the ground. "Fresh, could be them. Spread out," another ordered. "They can't be far." Tessa held her breath as the men dismounted, beginning a methodical search of the area. One was heading directly toward her hiding place, his eyes on the ground, following the faint tracks she'd left while gathering wood. Suddenly, a whistle sounded from somewhere to her left, sharp, like a bird call, but clearly human. The men whirled toward the sound, guns raised. "Over there." One shouted, and all 3 ran toward their horses through her gap in the rocks, Tessa saw York on his stallion, deliberately visible for just a moment on a ridge before disappearing. The outlaws mounted quickly and gave chase, thundering away from the hollow. Tessa remained frozen in her hiding place, unsure what to do. Had York sacrificed himself to lead them away from her? Should she wait or try to make her way to Silver Creek alone? As darkness fell, fear and worry gnawed at her. The temperature dropped, and she huddled deeper into her thin jacket, straining to hear any sound of returning horses. What if York had been captured, or worse? The thought sent a sharp pain through her chest, surprising in its intensity. It was near midnight when she heard a horse approaching, moving slowly and cautiously. Tessa pressed deeper into her hiding place, heart racing as a silhouetted figure dismounted at the edge of the hollow. "Tessa," York's voice, pitched low, was the most welcome sound she'd ever heard. "It's safe now." She scrambled from her hiding place, relief making her legs weak. Without thinking, she threw herself into his arms, clinging to him. "I thought they might have killed you." York stiffened momentarily in surprise, then his arms came around her, strong and reassuring. "Takes more than 3 of Holloway's lackeys to bring me down." Tessa became acutely aware of their position, her body pressed against his warmth seeping into her, the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. Embarrassed, she stepped back, though not as quickly as propriety might demand. "What happened?" "Led them on a wild chase through the hills, doubled back when I lost them." York unsaddled his horse, movements efficient despite obvious fatigue. "Your mare's hidden about a quarter-mile east. I'll fetch her at first light." They made a cold camp that night, not risking a fire that might attract attention. Sharing jerky and water, they sat close together for warmth as the desert night grew cold around them. "Why are you doing this?" Tessa asked softly. "Risking your life for a stranger." York was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because 10 years ago, nobody stood up for my family. Nobody was willing to face Holloway, even when they knew he was wrong." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting starlight. "Maybe this is my chance to do what should have been done back then. Even at the risk of your own life, some things are worth the risk." His gaze held hers, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that they were kindred spirits in this fight. Tessa shivered, not entirely from the cold. "Thank you." York nodded once, then shifted to pull his duster off, draping it around her shoulders. "Try to get some sleep, I'll keep watch." Wrapped in his coat, surrounded by his scent leather, tobacco, and something uniquely him, Tessa found it difficult to relax. Not from fear this time, but from a growing awareness of the man beside her. In just 2 days, York Thornton had become more than a rescuer to her. He was becoming someone she cared about, someone whose pain she felt as her own. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Dawn broke with a spectacular array of colors painting the eastern sky. True to his word, York retrieved Tessa's mare early, and they set out while the day was still young. Their encounter with Holloway's men had made them more cautious, sticking to rougher terrain where they were less likely to be spotted. "We'll cross Diablo Ridge today," York explained as they rode. "It's treacherous, but it'll save us almost a day's travel. From the other side, it's a straight shot to Silver Creek." The ridge lived up to its name. A narrow spine of rock with steep drops on either side, it required all their concentration to navigate safely. Tessa found herself holding her breath at the most difficult passages, trusting her mare's sure-footedness and York's guidance. At the highest point, they paused to rest the horses. The view was breathtaking, hundreds of miles of wilderness spread out before them, the distant glint of a river winding through the valley below. "Is that Silver Creek?" Tessa asked, pointing to the ribbon of water. York nodded. "By this time tomorrow, you'll be talking to Marshal Dawson." He hesitated, then added, "Your fight will just be beginning, though. Holloway has friends in high places." "I know, but the truth is on my side." She looked at him, a question forming that she wasn't sure she wanted answered. "What will you do after? Will you leave again?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to voice aloud. York's eyes searched hers, and for a moment, Tessa thought he might reach for her. Instead, he turned back to his horse. "We should keep moving. I don't like being exposed up here." They made their way down the far side of the ridge as afternoon shadows lengthened across the land. The descent was even more challenging than the ascent, requiring them to dismount and lead the horses through the steepest sections. By the time they reached level ground, both were exhausted and covered in dust. "There's a place ahead where we can camp," York said, pointing to a cluster of boulders near a small seep. "Good defensible position with water." As they approached the spot, York suddenly reined in, his posture alert. "Something's not right." Tessa followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. "What is it?" "Not sure." He dismounted, drawing his gun. "Stay here." Heart in her throat, Tessa watched as York moved silently toward the boulders, every sense obviously straining for danger. He disappeared from view for several minutes, long enough that she was considering following him despite his instructions. When he finally reappeared, his expression was grim. "Someone's been here recently. Campfire's still warm. Holloway's men, can't say for sure. Could be travelers, could be trouble." York scanned the surrounding area, eyes narrowed. "We can't risk staying here. We'll have to push on until dark, find somewhere less obvious." They rode for another hour as the sun sank toward the horizon, finally stopping in a dense grove of cottonwoods beside a small tributary of Silver Creek. The trees provided good cover, and the soft ground would muffle sounds of their presence. "We'll reach town by noon tomorrow," York said as they made camp, this time risking a small fire for coffee and to ward off the evening chill. "You'll be safe then." Tessa nodded, though the prospect of reaching their destination brought mixed emotions. Safety, yes, but also separation from the man who had come to mean so much to her in such a short time. "Will you at least stay until Holloway is arrested?" she asked, watching his profile in the firelight. York poked at the fire, sparks rising into the darkening sky. "Depends on the marshal. Dawson and I have history too, not all of it good. Because of the rough men you rode with," a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You remember that, huh?" he sighed. "Yes. After my father died, I fell in with the Cassidy gang for a time. Didn't ride with them long, realized pretty quick they were no better than Holloway, but long enough to earn a reputation." "Is that why those outlaws knew your name? Why they backed down?" York nodded. "I made some enemies in those days, some friends too, though that might be stretching the word. People remember the things I did, even if I've been trying to forget." "You're not that person anymore," Tessa said with quiet certainty. His eyes met hers across the fire, full of shadows and unspoken regrets. "How can you be sure? You barely know me." "I know enough." She reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "I know you risked your life for a stranger. I know you could have left me behind when those men appeared yesterday, but you put yourself in danger instead. Those aren't the actions of a bad man, York." He looked down at their joined hands, then slowly turned his palm up, his calloused fingers curling around hers. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through her body. "Tessa," he said, his voice rough. "When this is over," a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp, loud in the quiet night. Both froze, hands still joined. "Don't move," a harsh voice commanded as a figure stepped into the firelight, rifle aimed squarely at York. "Hands where I can see them, Thornton." 3 more men emerged from the shadows, all armed, all wearing the distinctive silver star of the Arizona Rangers. The leader, a weathered man with a gray-streaked beard, kept his rifle trained on York's chest. "Captain Fletcher," York said calmly, raising his hands slowly. "Been a while." "Not long enough," Fletcher replied coldly. "On your feet, nice and slow." His eyes flicked to Tessa. "Madam, step away from him. You're safe now." Confusion and fear warred within Tessa as she stood. "There's been a mistake. This man saved my life." Fletcher's expression didn't change. "No mistake, madam. York Thornton is wanted for robbery and murder. We've been tracking him for 3 days." "That's impossible," Tessa protested. "He's been with me, helping me reach Silver Creek." "And why would a known outlaw do that?" Fletcher asked skeptically. "Because I'm carrying evidence against Burton Holloway," Tessa said, desperation edging her voice. "Holloway's men have been trying to kill me. York protected me." Fletcher exchanged looks with his men. "Holloway, that complicates things." "Just let her go, Fletcher," York said, still outwardly calm though Tessa could see the tension in his shoulders. "She's telling the truth about the evidence. Take her to Marshal Dawson in Silver Creek. And you expect me to just let you ride away?" Fletcher's laugh was without humor. After what happened in Tucson, I didn't kill that man, York said, his voice hardening. I was set up. Tell it to the judge. Fletcher gestured to one of his men. Cuff him. Tessa stepped forward, placing herself between York and the approaching ranger. Captain Fletcher, I swear to you, this man is innocent of whatever you're accusing him of. Without him, I would be dead, and Holloway would continue terrorizing this territory with impunity. Fletcher studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Step aside, miss. I have a job to do. At least let me show you the evidence I'm carrying, Tessa pleaded. Then you'll understand why this is so important. Something in her earnest appeal must have reached the captain. He nodded reluctantly. Show me, but my man keeps his gun on Thornton. With shaking hands, Tessa retrieved her saddlebag, pulling out the packet of documents her uncle had entrusted to her. These prove that Holloway has been systematically stealing water rights, forging documents, even ordering the murder of ranchers who stood in his way. Fletcher took the papers, rifling through them with growing interest. His eyes widened at certain passages. This is serious business, miss, if these are authentic. They are, Tessa assured him. My uncle gathered these testimonies at great personal risk. It cost him his life. Fletcher handed the papers back, his expression thoughtful. Holloway's got powerful friends. Taking him down won't be easy. That's why I need to reach Marshal Dawson. My uncle trusted him. Dawson's a good man, Fletcher acknowledged. He glanced at York, who had remained silent during the exchange. What's your stake in this, Thornton? Why help her? Holloway burned my family's ranch when I was 15, York said simply. Killed my mother and sister. Been waiting a long time to see him pay. Understanding dawned in Fletcher's eyes. The Thornton place, out by Eagle Ridge, I remember that fire, officially ruled an accident. It wasn't. Fletcher was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with a decision. Finally, he lowered his rifle slightly. Here's how this is going to work. We'll escort you both to Silver Creek. Miss Armstrong, Tessa Armstrong, Miss Armstrong will present her evidence to Dawson. As for you, Thornton, Fletcher's expression hardened again. You'll stand trial for the Tucson incident. But I'll make sure Dawson knows you helped bring Holloway down. Might count for something with the judge. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best they could hope for under the circumstances. Tessa looked at York, who gave her a slight nod of acceptance. They broke camp quickly, the rangers efficient and watchful. Though they didn't handcuff York, 2 men kept close to him at all times, making it clear he was their prisoner. As they rode through the night toward Silver Creek, Tessa maneuvered her horse alongside York's whenever possible, their conversation necessarily limited by the ranger's presence. I won't let them convict you, she whispered during one such moment. Once Holloway is dealt with, I'll hire the best lawyer in the territory. York's smile was sad. Don't make promises you can't keep, Tessa. What happened in Tucson looks bad for me. Man ended up dead. Witnesses saw me there. Were you? Yes, but I didn't kill him. York glanced at the rangers riding ahead. Holloway's reach is long. He wanted me out of the way, and framing me for murder was convenient. Then we'll prove that too, Tessa said with determination. I won't let you go to prison or worse, not after everything you've done. York looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something new in her face. You're something special, Tessa Armstrong. Before she could respond, Fletcher called for them to pick up the pace, and they were separated once more. They rode through the night and into the morning, reaching Silver Creek just before noon as York had predicted. The town was larger than Tessa had expected, a proper settlement with a main street lined with businesses, a church steeple visible in the distance, and the bustle of a community going about its daily affairs. Fletcher led them directly to the marshal's office, a substantial building in the center of town. Inside, Marshal Dawson, a tall man with a shock of white hair and keen eyes, looked up in surprise at their entrance. Fletcher wasn't expecting to see the rangers in these parts. His gaze moved to York and his expression hardened. Thornton, heard you were back in the territory. Not by choice at the moment, York replied dryly, nodding toward his guards. Fletcher quickly explained the situation, with Tessa presenting her documents. Dawson listened intently, his face growing grimmer as he examined the evidence. I suspected Holloway was behind your uncle's death, he told Tessa. James was a good man and a friend, but we never had enough proof to move against Holloway. He tapped the papers. This changes everything. What happens now? Tessa asked. Now I telegraph the federal marshal in Tucson. This is bigger than Silver Creek. Dawson glanced at York. As for Thornton, he saved my life, Tessa said quickly. Multiple times. Without him, these documents would never have reached you. Dawson considered this. That may be, Miss Armstrong, but the law's the law. York's wanted for murder. A murder orchestrated by Holloway, she countered. Part of the same corruption these papers expose. The marshal exchanged looks with Fletcher, something unspoken passing between them. Finally, Dawson sighed. Here's what we'll do. Thornton stays in my custody until we sort this Holloway business out. If what you say about the Tucson killing being connected is true, we might find evidence of that when we arrest Holloway. He looked at York. No promises, but I'll give you a fair hearing. It was the best they could hope for under the circumstances. Tessa watched, heart aching, as York was led to a cell in the back of the office. Before he disappeared from view, he looked back at her once, his expression a complex mixture of resignation and something that might have been hope. Miss Armstrong, Dawson said gently, you look exhausted. The Silver Creek Hotel has clean rooms and there's a general store where you can purchase fresh clothing. Get some rest. This will take time to set in motion properly. Tessa nodded, suddenly aware of her disheveled state and bone-deep fatigue. Please, may I see him before I go? Dawson hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. York was sitting on the narrow bunk when she approached the cell, hat in his hands, shoulders slumped with weariness. He looked up at her footsteps, his expression lightening. You should get some rest, he said, rising to meet her at the bars. You look done in. So do you, Tessa replied, managing a small smile. York, I don't, he interrupted gently. Don't make promises about getting me out, just focus on Holloway. But you're innocent. Maybe, but I've done enough in my life to deserve some time behind bars. His fingers wrapped around the iron bars, knuckles white. Just knowing Holloway will finally face justice, that's enough. Not for me, Tessa said fiercely. It's not enough for me. Something flickered in York's eyes, surprise, then a warmth that made her breath catch. Tessa Armstrong, he said softly, you are the most stubborn, brave, remarkable woman I've ever met. Without thinking about propriety or the marshal watching from across the room, Tessa reached through the bars, placing her hand against York's cheek. His skin was rough with stubble, warm beneath her palm. For a heartbeat, they stayed that way, eyes locked, something unspoken passing between them. Then Dawson cleared his throat pointedly, and the moment was broken. I'll come back, Tessa promised, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. As soon as I've cleaned up. York nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I'll be here. The Silver Creek Hotel was modest but clean, offering Tessa her first real bath in days. She soaked in the hot water until it cooled, washing away the dust and fear of their journey. At the general store, she purchased a simple blue dress, undergarments, and a shawl, practical clothing that would serve her needs in this frontier town. Refreshed and properly attired, she returned to the marshal's office to find it buzzing with activity. Dawson was issuing orders to deputies and Fletcher's rangers, maps spread across his desk. Ah, Miss Armstrong, he greeted her. We've located Holloway. He's at his main ranch about 20 miles from here. We're organizing a force to bring him in. I want to go with you, Tessa said immediately. Dawson shook his head. Too dangerous. Holloway has at least a dozen armed men at his ranch at all times. But no arguments, miss. You've done your part bringing the evidence, now let us do ours. Frustrated but knowing he was right, Tessa nodded. May I see York again? Dawson's expression softened slightly. 5 minutes. Then I suggest you get some rest at the hotel. This could take a while. York was standing at the small barred window of his cell when she approached, staring out at the sliver of sky visible. He turned at her footsteps, his eyes warming at the sight of her. Blue suits you, he said simply. Tessa felt her cheeks warm. They're going after Holloway now. York nodded. I heard Dawson's a good lawman. If anyone can bring Holloway in alive to face trial, it's him. I wanted to go with them, Tessa admitted. A smile touched York's lips. Of course you did, brave to a fault. It's not bravery, it's... She hesitated, searching for words. I need to see it finished, for my uncle, for your family. I understand. York's fingers wrapped around the bars, so close to where her own hands rested. But Dawson's right to keep you here. Holloway won't go quietly. They fell silent, the inches between their hands seeming like an unbridgeable gulf. Finally, Tessa spoke the question that had been haunting her. What happens after, if they clear your name? York's eyes held hers, searching. What would you want to happen? The directness of his question took her breath away. I want. Tessa swallowed hard, gathering courage. I want you to stay, to help me rebuild my uncle's ranch. To see if what's growing between us might. She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. York's hand moved then, covering hers on the bar. Tessa, I'm not the settling kind, not anymore. Too many years on the drift, too many ghosts. I don't believe that, she said softly. I think you've been running because you had nowhere to call home. But what if you did now? Before he could answer, the office door burst open and Dawson strode in, buckling on his gun belt. We're heading out, Miss Armstrong. Should be back by nightfall, God willing. Tessa reluctantly stepped back from the cell, York's expression unreadable as their hands separated. Be careful, Marshal. Always am, miss. Dawson nodded to York. Thornton, behave yourself while I'm gone. Deputy Wilson will be keeping an eye on things. As Dawson left, Tessa lingered, unwilling to leave. I should go, let you rest. Tessa, York called as she turned away. When she looked back, his expression had softened. We'll finish that conversation when this is over. She nodded, hope flaring in her chest. I'll hold you to that, York Thornton. The waiting was excruciating. Tessa tried to rest at the hotel but found herself too anxious, pacing the small room until she finally gave up and returned to the main street. Silver Creek's residents went about their business, largely unaware of the drama unfolding 20 miles away. Tessa found herself in the town's small cafe, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the clock tick painfully slowly. The wait reminded her of those terrible days after receiving news of her uncle's death, that same helpless feeling of being unable to affect the outcome of events set in motion. It was near dusk when she heard the commotion outside, hooves on packed dirt, men shouting. Setting down her cup with shaking hands, Tessa hurried into the street to see a procession of riders approaching, Marshal Dawson at the lead. In the center of the group, hands bound and face thunderous with rage, rode Burton Holloway himself, a large man with a florid face and expensive clothing, now covered in dust from the ride. Behind him came several of his men, similarly bound and under heavy guard. A crowd gathered as the prisoners were led into the marshal's office. Tessa followed, heart pounding with a mixture of relief and trepidation. Inside, she found organized chaos, deputies processing prisoners, Fletcher issuing orders to his rangers, Dawson at his desk writing rapidly. And in his cell, watching it all with keen interest, York. His eyes found hers immediately, a question in them that she answered with a nod and a smile. Yes, they'd succeeded. Holloway was captured. Dawson looked up as she approached his desk. Miss Armstrong. As you can see, our mission was successful. Holloway put up some resistance, but we convinced him surrender was his best option. Any casualties? 2 of his men foolish enough to draw on rangers. Nothing serious on our side. Dawson gestured to the chair beside his desk. Have a seat. There's something you should know. Tessa sat, apprehension creeping up her spine. What is it? When we showed Holloway the evidence against him, he was talkative, trying to bargain for leniency. Dawson glanced toward York's cell. He confirmed what Thornton said about the Tucson murder. It was a setup, orchestrated by Holloway to eliminate a potential threat. Relief washed over her. Then York is innocent, you'll release him. It's not quite that simple, Dawson cautioned. Holloway's word alone isn't enough. But he did tell us where to find corroborating evidence, a ledger with payments to the actual killer, witnesses who were bribed. We're telegraphing Tucson now to investigate. How long will that take? A few days, maybe a week. Seeing her disappointment, Dawson added, but given the circumstances, I'm inclined to grant Thornton some latitude. He'll remain technically in custody, but not behind bars. You're releasing him, on one condition. Dawson's stern expression softened slightly. Someone respectable needs to take responsibility for him, vouch for his good behavior while we sort this out. Someone like, say, the new owner of the Armstrong Ranch. Tessa's heart leapt. I'll do it. Of course I will. Thought you might say that, Dawson said dryly. Let me finish this paperwork, then we'll arrange it. An hour later, after signing various forms and listening to Dawson's stern warnings about the consequences if York fled, Tessa stood beside the marshal as he unlocked the cell door. "You're a lucky man, Thornton," Dawson said as York stepped out. "Miss Armstrong has agreed to be responsible for you until we receive confirmation from Tucson. You're confined to Silver Creek and the immediate vicinity. No disappearing, or she'll forfeit a substantial bond." York's eyes went to Tessa, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper in his gaze. "I understand. Good. Report to my office every morning. Now get out of here before I change my mind." Outside, the evening air was cool and sweet with the scent of sage. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and Silver Creek's Main Street was quieting as businesses closed for the day. "You didn't have to do that," York said as they walked side by side toward the hotel. "Put yourself at risk for me." "It wasn't a risk," Tessa replied with quiet certainty. "I know you won't run." York stopped, turning to face her. In the golden light from a nearby window, his features were softened, the hard edges of the trail-worn gunman giving way to something more vulnerable. "How can you be so sure?" "You've known me less than a week. Sometimes a week is enough," Tessa said simply, "when it's the right person." York's hand rose slowly, hesitating before gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Tessa Armstrong," he said softly, "you are either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever met." "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted with a small smile. "Is that so terrible?" "No," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's remarkable." They stood there on the boardwalk, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings, both aware of the watching eyes of Silver Creek citizens. Finally, York cleared his throat. "I should find a room for the night." "The hotel has space," Tessa suggested. Falling into step beside him once more, they walked in companionable silence, each lost in thought. At the hotel entrance, they paused again, reluctant to part. "Would you join me for breakfast tomorrow?" Tessa asked. "We could discuss plans for the ranch." "If you're still interested in helping, that is." York's smile was slow and genuine. "I'd like that. 8 o'clock, in the cafe, I'll be there." Tessa watched him enter the hotel, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. For the first time since her uncle's death, the future seemed full of possibility rather than dread. The following morning dawned clear and bright. Tessa dressed with extra care in her new blue dress, arranging her hair in a simple but flattering style. At precisely 8 o'clock, she entered the cafe to find York already waiting, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes still simple and practical, but a far cry from his trail-worn appearance of the past days. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with an old-fashioned courtesy that surprised and pleased her. "Good morning." "Good morning," she replied, struck again by how different he looked when not tense with vigilance. More approachable, younger somehow, though the lines of experience remained etched around his eyes, over coffee and a breakfast far more substantial than their trail rations, they talked. Really talked, without the pressure of pursuit or the constraints of captivity. York spoke of his years after leaving Arizona, working cattle drives in Texas, scouting for the Army in the Dakota Territory, even a brief stint as a silver miner in Colorado. "Never stayed anywhere long," he admitted, tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "Always had that itch to move on. And now?" Tessa asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Do you still feel that itch?" York's eyes met hers across the table. "Not as much as I expected to." After breakfast, they visited the marshal's office, where York dutifully reported his presence as required. Dawson had news a telegram from Tucson confirming they were investigating Holloway's claims about the murder. "Looks promising," he told them. "The witness Holloway named has already admitted to being paid for false testimony." Relief washed over Tessa. "How long until it's official?" "Few more days, maybe a week. Wheels of justice turn slow but sure." Dawson eyed York. "In the meantime, Miss Armstrong mentioned she's heading out to her ranch today. Thought you might accompany her, seeing as you know the territory." "If she wants the company," York replied, glancing at Tessa. "I do," she said quickly. "I'd welcome your insight on what needs to be done." They set out mid-morning, riding side by side along the well-maintained road leading west from Silver Creek. It was strange, Tessa thought, to be traveling with York without the constant fear of pursuit, to be able to enjoy the journey and the man beside her. "Tell me more about your plans for the ranch," York said as they rode. "Your uncle ran cattle, you said." "Yes, but I'm thinking of expanding the horse breeding operation he started. There's good money in quality horses, especially with the army always needing remounts." Tessa glanced at him. "What do you think? Smart move. Less labor-intensive than cattle once you get established, and your uncle's land has good grazing." York's knowledge was impressive, further evidence of his varied experience. "You'll need a good stallion to build around and experienced hands." "I was hoping you might have suggestions for both," Tessa said carefully, watching his reaction. A smile tugged at York's lips. "I might know a few reliable men looking for honest work. As for the stallion," he patted his black's neck, "Thunder here has sired some fine colts in his day. If you're interested." The offer was casual, but Tessa recognized it for what it was: a tentative commitment, a reason to stay connected to her and the ranch even if he eventually rode on. "I'd be very interested." The Armstrong Ranch came into view shortly after noon, a sprawling property nestled in a verdant valley with Silver Creek winding through it. The main house sat on a rise as Tessa had described, a solid two-story structure of timber and local stone. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn completed the homestead, all well-maintained despite the owner's recent death. "Your uncle built something special here," York said as they approached, genuine admiration in his voice. "You can see the care that went into it." "He always said this land spoke to him," Tessa replied, emotion making her voice thick. "That the first time he rode through this valley he knew he was home." York's expression grew thoughtful. "I know that feeling. Had it once long ago. You could have it again," Tessa said softly. "If you wanted to." His eyes met hers and something passed between them, an understanding, a possibility still taking shape. But before he could respond, a man emerged from the barn, waving in greeting. "That's Hank, the foreman," Tessa explained. "He's been keeping things running since my uncle died." Hank proved to be a weathered, capable man in his 50s who had clearly been devoted to James Armstrong. He showed them around the property, updating Tessa on the state of the herds and the work that had continued in her absence. "Your uncle would be proud to see you taking an interest, Miss Armstrong," Hank said as they stood by the corral watching the small band of broodmares her uncle had begun collecting. "Most folks expected you'd sell up and head back east." "This is where I belong now," Tessa said with quiet certainty. "I intend to build on what my uncle started." Hank nodded approval, then glanced at York with undisguised curiosity. "And your friend?" "York Thornton," York introduced himself, extending a hand which Hank shook firmly. "I've been helping Miss Armstrong with some trouble." Understanding dawned in Hank's eyes. "You're the one who got her safely to Silver Creek. News travels fast out here." He looked at York with new respect. "Any man who stands against Holloway is welcome at this ranch." The rest of the afternoon was spent touring the property, discussing improvements and plans for the future. York's practical knowledge proved invaluable, his suggestions both insightful and considerate of Tessa's vision for the ranch. As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in spectacular colors, they found themselves on the porch of the main house, watching the day end just as Tessa had described experiencing when she first arrived. "You were right," York said quietly, leaning against a post. "It's a sight that gets in your blood." Tessa nodded, standing beside him close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. "Will you stay for dinner? Hank's wife Maria is an excellent cook and they live in the small cabin behind the orchard." "I'd like that, but—" York hesitated. "Dawson expects me back in town tonight." Disappointment flashed through Tessa, quickly replaced by understanding. "Of course, we should head back soon then." "I could come out again tomorrow," York suggested. "Help you look over those broken sections of fence Hank mentioned." "I'd appreciate that," Tessa said, warmth spreading through her at the knowledge he wanted to return. As they prepared to leave, Hank approached with a concerned expression. "Miss Armstrong, I don't like the idea of you two riding back to town so close to dark." "The roads aren't safe, especially with Holloway's remaining men still at large." "He's right," York agreed. "We should have started back earlier." "You're welcome to stay in the main house, miss," Hank offered, "and Mr. Thornton can take the guest room above the study." "Maria's already preparing dinner anyway." Tessa glanced at York, who looked torn between propriety and practicality. "Marshal Dawson did say I could go to the ranch," he said slowly. "Just not leave the Silver Creek area." "Then it's settled," Tessa decided. "We'll head back first thing in the morning." Dinner with Hank and Maria was a pleasant, comfortable affair. Maria, a warm woman with quick smiles and quicker wit, had indeed prepared a feast: roast chicken, fresh vegetables from the kitchen garden, and an apple pie that had York reaching for seconds. "You two must be exhausted after everything you've been through," Maria said as they finished their coffee. "The house is all ready, Miss Armstrong. Fresh linens on the beds, fireplaces laid in your room and the guest room if the night turns cool." Later, as York walked Tessa to the main house in the gathering darkness, a companionable silence fell between them. The stars overhead were magnificent, more brilliant than any Tessa had seen in Boston, the night air sweet with sage and pine. "Thank you," Tessa said as they reached the porch, "for everything you've done these past days. I don't think I've properly expressed how grateful I am." York shook his head. "You don't owe me gratitude, Tessa. If anything, I owe you. You believed in me when you had every reason not to." "It wasn't hard to believe in you," she said softly. "Not once I saw who you really are." In the silver light of the rising moon, York's expression was a mixture of wonder and something like fear, not of her, but of what she represented: possibility, change, roots. "Tessa," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Finally, with a small, self-deprecating smile, he said, "I'm not good at this, at saying what I feel." "You don't have to say anything," Tessa replied, gathering her courage. "But I do. I care for you, York, more than I should after knowing you such a short time. And I hope you might feel something similar." York's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "I do," he said simply. "God help me, I do." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Then, with exquisite slowness, York leaned down, giving her every chance to step away. Instead, Tessa rose on her toes to meet him, their lips touching in a kiss as soft as moonlight. It was brief, gentle, a question more than a demand. When they parted, Tessa felt breathless, her heart racing with emotions too new and powerful to name. "We should go inside," she said, reluctant to break the moment but aware of propriety even in this remote place. "It's getting late." York nodded, stepping back with visible reluctance. "Good night, Tessa." "Good night, York." Sleep was elusive that night, her mind too full of the day's events, of York's confession and that gentle kiss, of possibilities that seemed both thrilling and terrifying in their newness. Tessa lay in what had been her uncle's room, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, wondering what the morning would bring. Dawn found her already dressed and in the kitchen, attempting to prepare breakfast. Her cooking skills were rudimentary at best. Her aunt in Boston had employed a cook, but coffee and toast seemed manageable. York appeared in the doorway, hair damp from washing, wearing the same clothes but somehow looking refreshed. His smile when he saw her efforts warmed her from within. "Need a hand with that?" he asked, nodding toward the stove where she was attempting to fry eggs. "Please," Tessa admitted with a laugh. "I'm afraid my education neglected certain practical skills." Working together, they managed a respectable breakfast, the domesticity of the scene striking both of them with its simple rightness. They ate at the kitchen table, discussing plans for the day, both carefully avoiding mention of the kiss they had shared or the confessions that preceded it. "I should check in with Dawson," York said as they finished. "Make sure there's no news from Tucson. Of course, and I need to speak with Hank about hiring more hands if we're going to expand the horse breeding operation." Tessa hesitated, then added, "Will you come back afterward?" "There's still so much I'd like your opinion on." The smile that lit York's face was answer enough. "Try to keep me away." They rode back to Silver Creek together, the morning bright with promise. At the marshal's office, they found Dawson sorting through a stack of telegrams, his expression pleased. "Good timing," he said, holding up one of the yellow papers. "Just got this from Tucson. The prosecutor is dropping all charges against you, Thornton. Seems Holloway's confession opened up a whole nest of corruption down there. Relief washed over Tessa, her hand finding York's arm without conscious thought. That's wonderful news. York seemed stunned, as if he'd been prepared for a different outcome. I'm free to go, just like that. Well, there's paperwork to sign, statements to make, Dawson shrugged. But yes, essentially you're a free man. No bond, no reporting requirements. A complex mixture of emotions crossed York's face, relief, certainly, but also something like uncertainty. Freedom meant choices, and choices meant decisions that couldn't be blamed on circumstance. Thank you, Marshal, he said finally. I appreciate your fairness in all this. Dawson nodded, his keen eyes moving between York and Tessa, noting their closeness. Miss Armstrong, I assume you'll be staying in the territory to manage your uncle's ranch. Yes, Tessa confirmed. It's my home now. Good. We need more people with your courage around here. Dawson turned back to his paperwork. If you'll excuse me, I have a mountain of reports to file on Holloway. He'll be transferred to the federal court in Tucson next week. Outside, standing in the bright morning sunshine, York turned to Tessa. So, he said, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice. I'm a free man. Yes, she agreed, watching him carefully. Free to go wherever you choose. For a heart-stopping moment, York was silent, his eyes searching hers as if looking for an answer to a question he hadn't asked aloud. Finally, he said, I was thinking I might stay around Silver Creek. For a while, at least. Seems like there might be opportunities here for a man willing to put down roots. Joy bloomed in Tessa's chest, but she kept her voice measured. I can think of at least one such opportunity, a certain ranch that needs experienced help, especially with horses. That's so. A slow smile spread across York's face. Would this ranch happen to have a stubborn, brave, remarkable owner? It might, Tessa said, answering his smile with one of her own, though I've heard she can be difficult at times. York laughed, the sound rich and genuine, perhaps the first truly carefree laugh Tessa had heard from him. I think I can handle difficult. In that case, Mr. Thornton, would you consider a position as foreman of the Armstrong Ranch, with the possibility of advancement depending on how things develop? The implication wasn't lost on York, his expression sobered, though his eyes remained warm. That's a generous offer, Miss Armstrong, but are you sure? You barely know me. I know enough, Tessa said simply. I know you're a good man who's been carrying ghosts for too long. I know you love the land as much as I do, and I know that when I look at you, I see a future I want to explore. York stepped closer, propriety be damned, and took her hands in his. Tessa Armstrong, he said softly, when you rode into that canyon with outlaws on your tail, I thought I was saving you. Turns out you were saving me. Perhaps we saved each other, she suggested, squeezing his hands. Perhaps we did. York's smile was tender. Yes, I'll accept your offer. Both parts of it, if you're sure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They stood there in the middle of Silver Creek's main street, hands joined, the promise of a future spreading before them like the vast Arizona sky, boundless, bright, and filled with possibility. 6 months later, as autumn painted the hills around Silver Creek in gold and russet, Tessa stood on the porch of the Armstrong Ranch house, now the Thornton Armstrong Ranch, following a simple wedding ceremony attended by the entire community. Beside her, York wrapped an arm around her waist, both of them watching as the last of the day's visitors departed. Happy, he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Completely, Tessa replied, leaning into his embrace. Though I still can't believe Marshal Dawson got so emotional during the ceremony. York chuckled. The old lawman's going soft in his retirement. The past months had brought remarkable changes to both their lives. With Holloway convicted and sentenced to prison, the territory had begun to heal. Small ranchers who had been forced out returned to reclaim their land. The corrupt officials Holloway had bought were replaced, and a new sense of justice prevailed in Silver Creek. The Armstrong Ranch flourished under their joint care. York's expertise with horses had proven invaluable, and the breeding program was already showing promise. Thunder, his stallion, had indeed sired several promising foals from Tessa's uncle's mares, but the greatest change was in York himself. The restless drifter had found his place, his purpose, in building a future with Tessa. The ghosts that had haunted him for so long hadn't vanished entirely. Some nights he still woke from nightmares of fire and loss, but they no longer drove him. Instead, he looked forward, not back. "Do you ever miss it?" Tessa asked softly, the freedom of the trail answering to no one. York considered the question, his eyes scanning the ranch that had become his home, the expanded corrals where their growing herd of horses grazed, the new bunkhouse for the hands they'd hired, the freshly painted barn. "No," he said finally, with the honesty that had always defined their relationship. "I thought I would, but I don't. What I had wasn't really freedom, Tessa. It was just another kind of prison. This," he gestured to encompass the ranch, their home, "this is freedom." Tessa turned in his arms, rising on tiptoes to kiss him properly. "I love you, York Thornton, and I love you, Tessa Thornton." His arms tightened around her, more than I ever thought possible. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in the spectacular colors that had first captured Tessa's heart, they stood together on the porch of the home they were building, not just the physical structure, but the life they were creating together. The memory of that desperate chase through the canyon, of York riding between her and danger with that single powerful word, enough, seemed like a lifetime ago. Yet in many ways, their story had begun in that moment of courage and defiance, a turning point that had set them both on a path neither had expected but both now cherished. "What are you thinking?" York asked, noting her reflective expression. Tessa smiled up at him, her heart full. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most perfect destinations." York's answering smile was tender as he led his bride into their home, closing the door on the gathering dusk and stepping into the warmth of the life they had chosen together.